So we're joined today for our second keynote from Françoise von Trapp. She's also known as the Queen of 3D within the semiconductor industry, and as co-founder of 3D Insights, she's built a community of key players in the advanced packaging fields. So she will be giving us a talk on the sustainable future which requires heterogeneous integration. So take it away, Françoise.
Thanks, Carolyn. Thanks for the introduction, and thank you so much for inviting me to speak today. For those of you who don't already know me, as Carolyn said, let me tell you a little bit about myself and about 3D Insights. First of all, you should know I am not an engineer. My career in the microelectronics industry began in 2005 when I became associate editor of Advanced Packaging magazine. Now, I learned everything I know about technology by engaging with people like you at events like this. And in 2009, I created 3D Insights specifically to follow 3D integration and heterogeneous integration technologies. Now, so that's when I became known as the Queen of 3D. Fast forward to today, and 3D Insights has evolved into an online community that focuses not just on the technology, but on the people who create it. Today, we have over 40 member companies. We follow all sorts of trends that impact our industry. Today, I'd like to talk to you about some of them that I believe are critical to our future, not just as an industry, but society as a whole. So the title of my talk is A Sustainable Future Requires Heterogeneous Integration. So what do we mean by a sustainable future? And what does heterogeneous integration have to do with it? Well, I believe we're nearing an inflection point where we fundamentally need to change the way we do things to ensure our planet survives to support future generations. As the sign in this photo shows, which was taken at a Paris Accord March in Belgium, there is no planet B. So let's look at how sustainability is defined by the UN. They say sustainability is meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet theirs. Now, globally, sustainability has become a much larger conversation than just taking steps to achieve zero carbon emissions by 2030. And that's why the UN has identified three major pillars of sustainability: economic, environmental, and social. Think of them as people, planet, and profit. Now, zero carbon emissions only addresses the environmental aspect, and addressing economic and social issues is also critical. So recognizing this, in September of 2015, 193 member states of the UN adopted 17 new, why is that not working? Sustainable development goals. This was to make our world more prosperous, inclusive, sustainable, and resilient. So as you can see, these are the 17 goals. And I want to talk about some of the specific ones today. Key players in the semiconductor industry supply chain have established some sustainable practices to support a lot of these goals. And many of the technologies we're working on today, such as AI, 5G, the Internet of Things, and smart technologies, enable these goals, such as sustainable agriculture, sustainable cities and communities. They'll help us achieve goals like improving our health and well-being, providing quality education, and ensuring a clean water supply for all, among others. However, while the technologies we develop are helping to achieve some of these goals, manufacturing them also puts us in a situation of simultaneously contributing to the problems. That's why we need to attend to goal number 12 as an industry to practice responsible production, consumption, and consumption. You'll also notice goals number 5 and 10, gender equality and reduced inequalities. These are all also part of the equation to create a sustainable future. We'll talk more about these a little later. As the world becomes more socially conscious, so do the investors. It's no longer enough for a company to be profitable. They must also be purpose-driven and to make the world a better place in order to attract investments. Companies are also endeavoring to meet the environmental, social, and governance criteria that socially conscious investors are using to screen this process. So for instance, environmental, we would be concerned about energy use, waste, pollution we're creating, and the natural resources we're taking up. From the social perspective, we're looking at our business relationships. We should be paying attention to work with suppliers who have similar values. We have to do community outreach, and we need to be concerned about employee health and safety. From the governance perspective, we have to use above board accounting methods and look at stockholder voting. We have to have a board of directors and make political contributions. So why is sustainability important to microelectronics manufacturing? I've already mentioned some of the reasons why, and that for years, some of the companies that we work with have been progressing with their corporate social responsibility efforts, including sustainability. But now we're in the midst of this digital transformation, and semiconductors are its lifeblood. At the recent Technology Unites Global Summit, many of the speakers talked about how COVID-19 really pushed us over the edge into the digital transformation. Ajit Manocha of SEMI presented the information in this slide. He talked about how by 2025, we will have increased our connected devices by a factor of 10 to go from 30 billion to 300 billion by 2025. We'll also have doubled our economic growth from 13 trillion to 26 trillion. And then I'm sure you've heard the phrase, data is the new oil. Well, by 2025, we will have generated 200 zettabytes of data to create this new currency. This is great news for all of us, and it will even help the world achieve those sustainable development goals we're talking about. But at the same time, we need to consider the overall impact this is having on the world. In 2020 alone, the semiconductor industry produced 50 million tons of CO2 emissions building those devices. Imagine what that will look like in 5 years. We have work to do if we want to be part of the solution. So sustainability practices are being driven by key players. In her keynote at Tech United Global Summit, Sabine Herrlichka, CEO of Infineon Austria, put the responsibility for change squarely on our shoulders, saying that as an industry, we are cornerstones to modern society, and we are enablers for sustainability in the economy, environment, and in broader society. She talked about the data giants that are becoming clear economic factors, with market capitalization comparable to the GDP of entire nations. For instance, if Italy's GDP is similar to Apple's market capitalization. Canada and Microsoft, same thing. Korea and Amazon, Turkey and Facebook. This is why key players, like the ones you see here on the screen, specifically Intel, Micron, TSMC, and all the others, have ramped up their efforts, not just with eco-friendly manufacturing practices, but making efforts to check all the sustainable development goal boxes, as well as ESG criteria. And this is going to influence the entire supply chain to follow suit. And remember, this is not only about being altruistic, this is also just good business. So, bringing me to the focus of the talk, what role does heterogeneous integration play in all of this? Well, that all depends on what you mean by heterogeneous integration. And as I said earlier, achieving these is going to require a foundational shift in thinking. And I believe heterogeneous integration holds the key in 2 ways. First, let's look at how heterogeneous integration, the technology, will help us get there. So I'm sure you heard this today, probably from Bill Chen. The latest buzzword is about achieving power, performance, area, and cost in our devices. And everyone here knows that at this point in time, conventional scaling alone, a homogeneous approach, is not enough to get us where we need to be to enable electric vehicles, autonomous transportation, smart sustainable cities and infrastructure, and smart healthcare, and still achieve the sustainable development goals such as reducing poverty, improving water. What we need is sustainable solutions that integrate sensors, memory, logic, RF devices, power, etc. And the solutions this community is developing, such as chiplets, or the Faveros design. This is what's needed to achieve these goals. And we've had to adopt new ideas to get here. But you've been listening to technologies talks all day, so I'm not going to walk you through that. What I want to point out here is how the heterogeneous integration we've been talking about today can be used as an analogy for the type of heterogeneous integration that will contribute to a sustainable future, not just by making things like AI and electric vehicles possible, but by bringing together heterogeneous minds to find innovative solutions for all these goals. Now I want to talk about another type of heterogeneous integration, the culture. And I want to talk about the benefits of a heterogeneously integrated workforce, also known as diversity, equity, and inclusion, because that's what I'm really here to talk about today. And I want to bring to light my friend Margaret Kindling's, she said to me recently, DEI is not a woman's issue or a Black issue. This is something everyone, regardless of gender, race, or ethnicity, should care about, because in the end, diversity and inclusion make our industry better through increased creativity and innovation. And I've noticed that while the industry is doing a really great job bringing DEI to the forefront, quite often the talks that we have attract people who already believe in it versus those who really need to hear the message. And everybody needs to hear the message. I know one person who needs to hear the message is the gentleman who sat at the table at the 3D Insights Awards ceremony 2 years ago when we were presenting a Semi-Sister Award. And he didn't know that my partner was sitting at the table. And it was a meal, a dinner, a party that we had thrown. A woman-owned business had created this party. And he said, as we were presenting the award to his colleague, just what we need in this industry, more women. It was all my partner could do to not say, who do you think just paid for your dinner? Now, hopefully he's the exception to the rule, but I think the reason he feels that way is because he may feel threatened, because he thinks his job could be at stake. And we need to change this way of thinking. We need diversity, equity, and inclusion because the world is not monochrome. We need everyone's experiences, ideas, and innovation. We can't be like a system on a chip. We need to be like a system in a package, where diverse perspectives are integrated to come up with better ideas. Consider this, I was at Semicon Europa last year, or in 2019, sorry. And I walked by the On Semiconductor facial recognition demo. It identified me as a 50-year-old male, white male. Until I removed my glasses, then I was identified as a female. And I hope you're laughing over there. This is, it's so strange not to have people's response. Anyhow, so we all do need to hear this message and help change the system. So here's how I like to think about DEI. Diversity is being invited to the party. Inclusion is being asked to dance. Equity is having a seat at the decision-making table. And it's not just enough to have a diverse and inclusive workforce. For it to be sustainable, it must be equitable. To become more innovative, profitable, and productive, we need all types of perspectives. And it's not just about creating diversity. We have to avoid tokenism, including a woman or a person of color on a panel just because they're a woman or a person of color. We need people with knowledgeable skill sets, and we need new ways of evaluating performance. The reason it's so difficult to create an equitable C-suite is because of the prerequisites that have been set, preventing women and people of color from getting a seat at the table. Maybe you needed to have served on a board previously, or you needed to have previously been a CEO or be a CEO now. There's a lot of steps in that ladder. This is a systemic issue. We shouldn't be figuring out how to help people climb the systemic ladder. We need to find a new ladder. So, off my soapbox for a minute. And what is 3D Insights doing to promote sustainability and DEI? Well, let me tell you, it is not easy being a woman in the industry that has been a men's club for a very long time. I didn't need market research to tell me that my gender was in the minority. I just had to look around the room or check the lineup of speakers recruited to give a talk. I have started noticing a shift though. For example, at the Tech United Global Summit Executive Forum, almost 30% of the speakers were women, so I applaud them for that. So as part of our community activities at 3D Insights, we set out to make an impact. We started with creating the Semi-Sister Initiative. And this is basically a social network for all women in the industry, not just the engineers. I mean, I'm not an engineer and I couldn't be part of the IEEE Women in Engineering or the Society of Women Engineers. We started organically as we sought each other out at networking events that were predominantly male. And it was like, hey, you're my semi-sister. So we ended up creating a group. And in this past year, we've actually had social hours every month. And it's really becoming a strong sisterhood and a strong membership. And by the way, if you're a male and you want to be part of Semi-Sisters, we'll let you in. You are more than welcome to join the conversation. You may not like it, though. Now, in 2019, we created the Semi-Sister Award to recognize companies and organizations that demonstrate best practices in DEI. This year's award winner will be selected by a committee based on criteria they set, and the winner will be announced on Monday. Finalists include ANSYS, Brewer Science, Edwards, Form Factor, and Lamb Research. We also created a sustainability award this year, which will also be awarded Monday. This is based on criteria also set by a committee, demonstrating their commitment to the Sustainable Development Goals, particularly clean water and sanitation, affordable and clean energy, responsible consumption and production, climate action. And the finalists for this award are Intel, ASE, Lamb Research, Tokyo Electron, and ST Microelectronics. Lastly, this year, we established the 3D Insights DEI Fund to support women-owned and minority-owned tech businesses. Seeded by a portion of the proceeds from the 2021 3D Insights Awards and our mural project, we'll be growing that fund. And when it hits $100,000, we will start awarding grants. Hopefully it will help, the $100,000 will help it to grow organically that way. And I'd like to show you the video, the time-lapse video that we just created this week during this effort. It's kind of fun. Hopefully I can make this work. We generally do a mural at IMAPS Device Packaging Conference, but because of COVID, we weren't able to do that this year. So we came up with this idea. Basically, to the top sponsors, the top logos are the platinum sponsors for the awards. And then the logos that you'll see being added shortly are companies who each donated $500 directly to the fund, and they're being recognized in this artwork. They'll be receiving copies of this to hang on their wall, and we'll be sharing this on social media. So I want to thank all of these companies for their participation, and SPTS is one of them. Oh. Okay. So at this point, you might be asking, yeah, but this is all great, but I'm not in HR or on the board of directors at my company. What difference can I make? Well, to build a diverse, inclusive, and equitable workforce, we need to eliminate unconscious bias. And we all have unconscious bias. We all have, there are social stereotypes about certain groups, and everyone holds unconscious beliefs, whether we know it or not. So we really need to start being more mindful about that. We can think there are things we can do. We can assess how biases affect choices. Don't go with your gut, and be intentional on how to be more inclusive. If you're not sure, it's okay to ask. Identify, consider how your organization encourages DEI, and identify if metrics are used to track success. Support, become an ally to the only on your team by asking for and valuing their opinion. The only woman, the only person of color, the only gay person, the only transgender person, the only really old person. Somebody has mentioned to me recently that ageism is an issue, and that should also be considered in diversity, equity, and inclusion. Actively listen to them, invite them to discussions and decision-making. Take responsibility for making yourself and your workplace more inclusive. Participate, attend an industry DEI event or talk such as this one, and ask your organization to get involved in initiatives that are focused on DEI education. Sponsor, use your positional power to support a developing professional or university student via industry and industry mentor programming, such as IMAPS or your company's internal program. And lastly, share. Give IMAPS recommendations for speakers and topics to keep the conversation going. Thank you. That's pretty much the end of my talk. And thank you for listening. And I hope you stay on after for the rest of the conversation that we're having later.
Yep, thank you, Françoise. I think the breakout rooms will be a lot better forum for one-to-one discussions on this sort of subject. But I would have one question. Aren't any questions on the chat? I was just recruitment of the younger generation. We get the impression they feel strongly about this subject. Do you feel that's a good argument for the companies to take it seriously? And
absolutely, I think the younger generation, they are looking to work places. They're very concerned about working at purpose-driven companies and companies that follow the ESGs and are sustainable. And they want to, they look at a company's culture. They don't just look at the job. But we also still need to go even beyond that. We need to help at the university level, at the high school level, and earlier, to encourage parents and young women and children to pursue, to understand what an engineering career is, or even, I'm not, like I said, I'm not an engineer, to pursue careers in this industry. There's a lot of ancillary jobs. If you're going into business, if you want to be an executive, yes, it's
marketing.
Good to but not, does every CEO in this industry have an engineering background? Did they come to this from marketing? Did they, there needs to be other ways to move up the ladder.
I imagine Anne's talk, which is next, will touch on that. But I think first, before moving, still no other questions for, if you have any questions for Françoise or want to talk any more to Françoise or Anne, we'll be in one of the breakout rooms later. Oh, got one just quickly. Is company engagement at school level important?
Absolutely.
Particularly in promoting engineering for women?
Absolutely. Brewer Science has done a really tremendous job with going out into their community. And they do this thing that they bring in teachers in the summer for summer programs and do workshops with the teachers so that they can then go out and inspire the children. So, not just having the children, and doing tours is great. Having things like Semi-High-Tech U programs is great. I think anything we can do to encourage, and it's going to take time. We don't, I was having a conversation with my semi-sister selection committee, and Salah Nasri, who is, he's the managing director of the International Semiconductor Executive Summit. And he happens to be Black. And he came on, he's very, aware of the situation and has spoken about it himself. And he says we need to get the women in first and then we'll worry about color, because he thinks that we are closer with women than we are with people of color, but we all need to work together to make this happen. I see more questions coming in, so I'll pause.
Just what time? Yeah, I think we're okay for time, just about. Okay, so do you find there's a limited appetite for EDI or DEI? And if so, how can we increase people's engagement?
What do you mean by limited appetite? People are sick of hearing about it?
Probably, yeah.
I think we need to, I tried to, that's why I didn't present any statistics. If you've been to previous DEI events, I think we need to move the conversation along, like talking about unconscious bias. Yes, right now it's a hot topic. Everybody has DEI events. And I think that until we have achieved our goals and have more equity and equitability, and more equity, we have to, it started out as being a diversity conversation, and then it became a diversity and inclusion conversation. And now we've added the equity, and it's funny because if you do it in that order, then it's DIE, and nobody likes that acronym. The equity and inclusion. But, I think it's also trickling down. I think, we had them at very high level conversations. We had them within organizations. And now we need to bring, I'm happy to see that most of the people who signed up for this event, I think you said there were 70 overall and there's 50 here.
Yeah, I think the maximum was 60 with this morning. So.
Okay, so I really appreciate that you're all here. All afternoon. I really, really appreciate that, because I do know that I've been on calls where, the speakers are speaking and we're preaching to the choir. So it, and that's one of the reasons I titled my talk without DEI in the title, because I didn't want to turn anybody off. So yes, there is a limited appetite, and we need to get tricky.